Warning: the following story contains descriptions of graphic violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Since 1976, the state of Florida has executed 105 convicted murderers, all at Florida State Prison. As of September 6, 2023, 292 offenders are awaiting execution. Here are 3 serial killers executed in the state of Florida. Number 1. Gary Ray Bowles. Gary Ray Bowles was born in Clifton Forge, Virginia, and was raised in Rupert, West Virginia. His father, Frank, who worked as a coal miner, had died from black lung disease 6 months before, and his mother, Frances, remarried several times. Bowles was abused by his second stepfather, a violent alcoholic who also abused Bowles' mother and older brother. The abuse continued until, at age of 13, Bowles fought back and severely injured his stepfather. He left home thereafter, angered by his mother's decision to remain in the marriage. He was homeless for the next few years, earning money as a prostitute to men. In 1982, he was arrested for beating and sexually assaulting his girlfriend, and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. In 1991, after his release from prison, he was convicted of an unarmed robbery and theft of an elderly woman's purse, a crime for which he was sentenced to 4 more years in prison. He was released in 2. On March 15, 1994, in Daytona Beach, Florida, Bowles killed his first victim, John Hardy Roberts, age 59, who had offered him a temporary place to live. Bowles beat and strangled him to death, and then stole his credit card, which he later used in Kingsland, Georgia, and Nashville, Tennessee. Police soon considered him a suspect after finding his fingerprints and probation records at the crime scene. Over the next 6 months, Bowles murdered 4 other men: 39-year-old David Jarman Wheaton of Maryland, 72-year-old Milton Bradley in Savannah, Georgia, 47-year-old Alverson Carter Jr. in Atlanta, Georgia, and 38-year-old Albert Morris in Hillard, Florida. Typical modus operandi was to prostitute himself to his victims before beating and strangling them and stealing their credit cards. While on the run, Bowles was put on the FBI's list of the country's 10 most wanted fugitives for his 4 known victims. On November 27, 1994, Bowles was arrested for the murder of Walter J. Hinton in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, and confessed to all 6 murders. Following his arrest for the murders, Bowles told police that following his 1991 release from prison, he had moved to Daytona Beach and moved in with a girlfriend and resumed working as a prostitute. According to Bowles, his girlfriend then became pregnant, but then had an abortion after she learned that Bowles was a sex worker. Bowles told police officers that he blamed gay men for the abortion, and this led to him becoming a murderer. In May 1996, Bowles pleaded guilty to the killing of Walter J. Hinton in Jacksonville on November 17, 1994. Hinton died after Bowles hit his head with a 40-pound stepping stone while Hinton was sleeping and stuffed a towel down his throat during the struggle. Bowles received the death penalty for Hinton's murder. In August 1997, while sitting on death row for the slaying of Hinton, Bowles pleaded guilty to beating and strangling Roberts in 1994. Bowles was found guilty of 3 counts of murder and sentenced to death. But the Florida sentence was reversed by the Florida Supreme Court when they determined that the court erred by allowing the jury to hear that Bowles hated homosexuals and that the victim was gay. He was given a new sentencing hearing, and in 1999 again received the death penalty. Bowles was executed by lethal injection on August 22, 2019 at Florida State Prison in Raiford. Bowles ate 3 cheeseburgers, french fries, and bacon as his last meal. Number 2. Donald Dilbeck. Donald David Dilbeck was born on May 24, 1963. At age 6, Dilbeck's father walked out on him and his alcoholic mother, and he was placed in several foster homes until age 15. On April 11, 1979, Dilbeck was a high school dropout and runaway, sitting inside a stolen car at a closed park at the beach in Fort Myers Beach, Florida. Somebody made a suspicious person complaint about this, and Lee County Deputy Dwight Lynn Hall arrived and questioned him. He ran from the car, so Hall chased and caught him on foot. During a struggle that followed, Dilbeck grabbed Hall's gun and shot him dead. He was arrested and on June 6 sentenced to life imprisonment. On February 7, 1983, Dilbeck escaped prison and was recaptured. For this, he was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison. He was later given a 25-year mandatory minimum sentence and put in a lower security facility, where he was disciplined multiple times, including for attempted assault in 1984 and drinking intoxicants in 1985. On June 22, 1990, Dilbeck was working with other inmates on a catering function at the Quincy Vocational Center. He walked away and ended up in Tallahassee, where he stole a paring knife. On June 24th, he approached a woman named Robbie Faye Van, 44, in her vehicle in the parking lot of a Tallahassee mall. With the knife, he attempted to carjack her, and she resisted. He then stabbed her repeatedly, killing her. The vehicle crashed in the lot, and he fled on foot, chased by a mall security guard. First reports to 911 were of a car crash, then a stabbing and a foot chase. He was arrested in a nearby backyard soon after, still armed with a knife. Governor Bob Martinez called for a tighter custody of inmates and firing of the corrections officer involved. A 1991 article called the case reminiscent of Willie Horton's 1988 furlough by Michael Dukakis's program. Dilbeck's court-appointed lawyer concealed his crimes and tried to save him from the electric chair. Dilbeck was convicted of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and armed burglary and was sentenced to death on March 15, 1991. He also got 2 more consecutive life sentences on top of the one he was already serving. He was sent to death row at the Florida State Prison in Raiford. At the sentencing, Dilbeck told the judge, "I am really sorry for what happened. I wish I didn't, not because I'm standing here, but because it happened. I'm asking for a life sentence, not for my sake, but for the sake of my parents." His parents said he had been brain damaged and abused. On July 23, 2023, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Dilbeck's death warrant, scheduling his execution for February 23rd. Dilbeck was executed that day at Florida State Prison via lethal injection. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. Dilbeck's last words were an attack on DeSantis. He said, "I know I hurt people when I was young. I really messed up. But I know Ron DeSantis has done a lot worse. He's taken a lot from a lot of people. I speak for all men, women, and children. He's put his foot on our necks. Ron DeSantis and other people like him can, quote, suck our dicks." He is the first person executed in Florida since the execution of Gary Ray Bowles in 2019, and the 100th execution since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Number 3. Danny Rolling. Danny Rolling was born in Shreveport, Louisiana on May 26, 1954. His father was a Shreveport police officer named James Rawling, who told Danny that he was unwanted from birth. James also abused and beat Danny's mother Claudia, and his brother Kevin for frivolous things, such as breathing in a way that displeased him. In one incident, Danny's mother went to the hospital after claiming her husband tried to make her cut herself with a razor blade. She made repeated attempts to leave her husband, but always returned shortly. In one example of the senior Rawling's sense of discipline, he pinned Danny to the ground and handcuffed him, then had police take his son away because he was embarrassed by him. In another story, Danny had a dog, but James beat the dog so often that it died in Danny's arms. As a teenager and a young adult, Rawling was arrested several times for robberies in Georgia and was caught spying on a woman getting dressed. As an adult, he had trouble trying to assimilate into society and hold down a steady job. At one point, Rawling worked as a waiter at a Pancho's restaurant in Bossier City, Louisiana. In August 1990, Rawling murdered 5 students, 1 student from Santa Fe College and 4 from the University of Florida, during a burglary and robbery spree in Gainesville, Florida. He mutilated his victims' bodies, decapitating one. He then posed them, sometimes using mirrors. In the early morning hours of Friday, August 24th, Rawling broke into the apartment shared by 2 university freshmen, 18-year-old Sonia Larson and 17-year-old Christina Powell. Finding Powell asleep on the downstairs couch, He stood over her briefly but did not wake her up, choosing instead to go to the upstairs bedroom where Larson was also asleep. Rawling murdered Larson, first taping her mouth shut to stifle her screams, and then stabbing her to death with a K-bar knife. She died trying to fend him off. Rawling then went back downstairs, taped Powell's mouth shut, bound her wrists together behind her back, and threatened her with the knife as he cut her clothes off. He then SA'd her and forced her face down onto the floor, where he stabbed her 5 times in the back. Rawling posed the bodies into sexually provocative positions. He took a shower before leaving the apartment. A day later, on Saturday, August 25th, Rawling broke into the apartment of 18-year-old chemistry honor student at nearby Santa Fe College named Krista Hoyt, prying open a sliding glass door with a screwdriver. Finding she was not home, he waited in the living room for her to return. At 11 a.m., Hoyt entered the apartment, and Rawling surprised her from behind, placing her in a chokehold. After she had been subdued, he used duct tape to gag her mouth and to bind her wrists together behind her back, led her into the bedroom, where he cut the clothes from her body and SA'd her. As in the Powell murder, he forced her to lie face down onto the bed and stabbed her in the back, rupturing her aorta. He then flipped her body over and sliced her abdomen open from pubic bone to her breastbone. After arriving back at his campsite, Rawling could not find his wallet, thinking he may have lost it at the murder scene. He returned there, at which time he decapitated Hoyt, posed her body in a sitting position at the edge of her bed, and placed her head on a shelf facing the corpse. He later claimed his intent was to add the shock of whoever discovered her. By this point, the murders had attracted widespread media attention. Many students had begun taking extra precautions, such as changing their daily routines and sleeping together in groups. Because the spree was happening so early in the fall semester, some students withdrew their enrollment or transferred to other schools. Tracy Paulus, who was 23 years old, was living with her roommate, Manny Taboda, also 23. On Monday, August 27th, Rawling broke into their apartment by prying open their sliding glass door with the same tools he had used previously. Rawling found Taboda asleep on one of the bedrooms and killed him after a struggle. Hearing the commotion, Paulus went down the hall to Taboda's bedroom and saw Rawling. She attempted to barricade herself in her bedroom, but Rawling broke through the door. Rawling taped her mouth and wrists, cut off her clothing, and SA'd her before turning her over and stabbing her 3 times in the back. Rawling posed Paulus's body and left Taboda's in the same position in which he had died. With the exception of Taboda, all of the victims were petite white brunettes with brown eyes like Rawling's mother. Although law enforcement initially had very few leads, police did identify 2 suspects. One suspect was Edward Lewis Humphrey, a University of Florida student who had a history of mental illness and bore numerous scars on his face from a car accident. Humphrey was arrested after a physical altercation with his grandmother and held in custody for 5 months until the grand jury refused to indict him on the murder charges, citing insufficient evidence. Humphrey's photo was shown repeatedly by media outlets. Authorities publicly cleared him of all charges after Rawling's arrest. The other suspect was also later cleared. Louisiana police alerted Florida authorities to an unsolved triple murder in Shreveport on November 4th, 1989. Detectives noted that there were similarities between the Gainesville murders and those of 55-year-old Tom Grissom, his 25-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. The family had been attacked in their home as they were preparing for dinner. Afterwards, Julie Grissom's body had been mutilated, cleaned, and posed. Don Maines, an investigator on the case with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, traveled to Shreveport in November of 1990 because of similarities between the murders committed in Gainesville and the murders committed in Shreveport. They included posing of the victims, tape residue on the victim's body, and vinegar used to clean the body. Maines said they tested the body fluids from the perpetrator in Shreveport and found that this person also had type B blood. He called the match to the evidence in Gainesville a revelation in the case. Shortly after Maine's trip to Shreveport, a Shreveport resident, Cindy Jurikich, called Crime Stoppers and reported that Danny Rolling was possibly connected to the murders in both cities. 3 months earlier, in August 1990, Jurikich heard a news report about a string of murders as she traveled through the Florida Panhandle. The report made her think about Rawling, whom she had met at her Louisiana hometown church, and his possible link to these 3 other Shreveport murders. Rawling had said deeply disturbing things to both her and her then husband, Steve Dobbin. Quote, "He'd come over every night for a while, and then one night, Stephen came in and he goes, 'He's got to go,'" Jurek said. She also said that Dobbin told her that night Rawling had told him he had a problem. I said, "What kind of problem?" Jurek had said, "He likes to stick knives into people." Jurek had said she dismissed these comments when she heard about them because she didn't want to believe Rawling could be responsible for the murders in Shreveport. Rawling had also told her, "One day I'm going to leave this town, and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful, and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day." News of the Gainesville murders haunted Jurek, so she finally contacted police in November, based on her hunch about Rawling's connection to the murders in both cities. Quote, "It would not let me rest," she said. "One day I picked up the phone, I called Crime Stoppers, and I said, 'I think there's one guy y'all need to investigate, Danny Rolling.' Investigators responded to the tip and quickly found Rawling, who had been arrested on September 7th, 1990, for an Ocala, Florida supermarket robbery. The robbery had been committed 10 days after the bodies of Paulus and Taboda were found. Rawling was being held in Marion County Jail, 40 miles south of Gainesville. Investigators determined that Rawling had type B blood, like the suspect in both the Gainesville and Shreveport murders. Once Florida investigators realized that Rawling had multiple convictions for armed robbery, they realized he could have also been responsible for the bank robbery that occurred on the day Krista Hoyt's body was found. They returned to the evidence locker where the gun, screwdriver, bag of money, and cassette player had been stored and listened to the tape. They also found tools matching marks left at Gainesville's murder scene. The small camp where he had been living was in a wooded area near apartment complexes frequented by students. Investigators discovered audio diaries he had made there, alluding to the crimes. Later, it was discovered on August 5th, 1990, Rawling broke into the home of Janet Frank in Sarasota, Florida. He bound and gagged her with duct tape while he sexually assaulted her, but did not kill her. In November 1991, Rawling was charged with 5 counts of murder. He was brought to trial nearly 4 years after the murders. He claimed his motive was to become a superstar similar to Ted Bundy. In 1994, his trial could get underway. Rawling unexpectedly pleaded guilty to all charges. Subsequently, State Attorney Rod Smith presented the penalty phase of the prosecution. During his trial, Court TV conducted an interview with Rawling's mother from her home, during which his father could be heard shouting off camera. On April 20th, 1994, Rawling was sentenced to death. Rawling was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. Shortly before he was executed in Florida for the series of killings in Gainesville, Rawling claimed responsibility for the Shreveport murders, handing his spiritual advisor, Reverend Mike Hudspeth, and Florida police a handwritten confession and apology. Rawling had a last meal of lobster tail. He sang a gospel hymn, but made no statement immediately before his execution, which was witnessed by many of his victims' relatives. Rawling was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on October 25, 2006, after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a last-ditch appeal. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. Eastern.